presents your source for leading-edge news and information on today's hottest products and services. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
Well, hello and welcome to the program. I'm Sterling Fox, joined in studio by the Executive Director of the Condominium Homeowners Association of British Columbia, who also writes in the Victoria Times Colonist in Vancouver Province as their Condo Smarts columnist, and who most recently has also been added to the roster of 24 Hours newspaper as their Strata Living columnist on Thursdays. Tony Giaventu, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Sterling. How are you tonight?
I'm well, thank you. Mere days ahead of Christmas here, down to the very, very short shopping stretch here, Tony.
It makes you wonder, isn't it? The week before Christmas, everybody's cramming to get their Christmas tree and their decorations and last-minute shopping and racing around. Makes you wonder what's going on in the Strataland these days.
Well, it certainly does. And, you know, of course, there's not a condo or strata complex you can drive by anywhere in the Metro Vancouver area that doesn't have some kind of Christmassy theme motif going on, but it's irregular. You know, some of these buildings appear to have been done up with Christmas lights with a plan. And others, you can see balconies with some lights, and most of the building is darkened. So clearly, Tony, different strata councils approach the festive season and decorating differently.
Everybody's bylaws are different. All their rules around what you can or cannot do to the outside of the building, what kind of decorations you can have, how long the decorations are permitted, lights, you know, even hours that lights may be on, because the lights on a balcony could be a nuisance to another strata lot.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Windows facing the balcony, you know. There are as many stratas as there are that many rules and bylaws that will affect different areas of the buildings.
One thing that we like to do on Talk About Strata for Key Pacific here on Experts on Call is respond to your emails. Our address is radio@keypacific.com. Let me spell Key Pacific because it's kind of tricky. QUAY Pacific.com. So the address radio@keypacific.com. Sarah in Richmond has written us, Tony. She's got a bit of a Christmas dilemma going on. Here's what she's written. We brought a live Christmas tree into our unit, and we were promptly informed that they are prohibited under strata rules and regulations. So Sarah says, I went to our strata council's website to print off a copy of the rules and noticed there aren't any rules about live Christmas trees. So where did these people get off telling me to get rid of my live Christmas tree? That's a fair question, especially if there aren't any rules and somebody says there's a rule.
It's a great question. One of the things that you pointed out earlier on in the email is the strata's rules and regulations.
Right.
Right? And it's a little bit of a misunderstanding, I think, in a lot of strata corporations. You're allowed to have bylaws, which affect all of the property, including the strata lots, and rules, which affect only the use and enjoyment of common property. Stratas cannot create regulations. Regulations are a part of the statute and part of the legislation.
Okay.
So frequently they use the word regulations, and it's a misnomer. It's not what is permitted.
So the only regulations that apply
or bylaws
to any strata property anywhere in British Columbia, the only actual regulations are the letters of the law in the Strata Act.
That's right. Strata Property Act regulations.
Okay, so that's the only real regulation. So then we're down to rules, Tony, and bylaws.
Exactly.
Okay, so in Sarah's case, somebody from her strata council said, oh, there's a rule. You can't put a live tree in your unit. She goes to the website. There's no rule.
Right.
So where does she take this then?
Well, in strata corporations, it's interesting they have a website too, because strata corporations actually mount up their own websites now, and they'll post the general information about the strata. Strata corporations need to be careful about their websites. They need to make sure they're not posting confidential or private information, and they also need to make sure that the information they disclose on the website is not being used for disclosure of information around sales of units.
Okay.
It could be misleading. It may not be complete. There could be a variety of problems with that. So the website use is a great way, though, to get information out to your owners. Always remind them about, you know, changes are in what's happening in the strata, schedules that are coming up, special events that are happening in the property, inspections, all those types of things. It's a great place to store your bylaws and your rules. But whatever you store has to be accurate.
Aha.
Right? And strata corporations historically, you know, if a strata corporation was built in 1985, you know, in the last 15, 20 years, they have probably filed in that 15-year window, they probably filed 7 or 8 different sets of bylaws. So what the strata needs to do, what they're posting to the website, is make sure they file what's actually in force.
Okay.
Right? Make sure that what the owners are seeing is what's in force. And if you have a consolidation of bylaws, make sure you've gone through to see it that it's accurate.
So let me stop you for just a sec, because this whole business of a strata council anywhere developing a website for the use of that community is clearly it's a trend that's becoming firmly established.
It's a growing trend, and with so many people who don't live either in their strata, who are landlords, or they live outside of the province or outside of the country, it's a great way for them to access information.
Sure.
Right? And so, the monthly council minutes can be posted on the website. So rather than sending them out to everybody or publishing them, it can save quite a lot of money if they're available and everybody takes advantage of that. Not everybody has the use of online services or email, so they're still going to have to produce some documents for them. But no, certainly it's a fast-growing trend for strata corporations.
So Sarah gets told by somebody in the strata council that she can't bring a live Christmas tree in our building. It's against the rules. So she says, fine, goes to the website, looks it up, and discovers there's no rule. So now, first of all, does she get to keep the tree and tell the strata person to buzz off and possibly inflame tensions?
Right.
Or what's the remedy here, Tony?
Well, we covered this story in the province a week ago, and the issue is, if there is no bylaw with respects to having live trees in a strata lot, then the strata corporation isn't prohibiting it, and she's allowed to have a live tree.
Okay.
The rules can prohibit the transfer of things like trees through common property and stuff, but they can't prohibit a tree in a strata lot. Rules do not apply to strata lots. They only apply to common property and common assets.
Oh, so maybe they don't want you dragging your trees through the lobby, but if you can hoist it up over the balcony from the outside, you're good to go.
Oh, that's even worse.
Oh, okay.
That's an accident and a disaster looking for a place to happen.
All right.
But, so the strata corporations want to prohibit live trees in the buildings, and certainly, there are a number of fire safety reasons why that's a good decision.
In most rental apartment buildings, for example, they're just not on.
Absolutely.
They're just not even in consideration.
But you're also dealing with, in addition to fire safety, you're also dealing with the mess. It's the aftermath, the headache afterwards, cleaning up the mess that people have left in the building, dragging their trees through the elevators, the stairwells, the carpets, the disposal of the trees after the holiday season.
Sure.
Some buildings end up having a stack of Christmas trees in their back parking lot, and everybody's wondering where they came from. So the strata can actually restrict or prohibit those. But her bylaws, Sarah's bylaws and rules, say absolutely nothing.
Right.
So there's nothing the strata corporation can do. There is no remedy for them unless they adopt bylaws or that prohibit trees and rules that control things like, how you can take a tree in out of a building. I've seen rules that in some stratas where they permit live trees, but the rules require that the trees have to be bagged completely to take them in and out of the building.
Yeah.
Right. Reasonable expectation. Owners also need to be aware that if there is damage caused to buildings, and so whether it's by them or their tenants, the owner's going to quite likely end up being responsible for the damage if the strata found out who did it. Right.
Okay.
So you can almost see them with a little forensic kit taking samples of the tree at the door of the owner and following the trail of pine needles out of the building to find out whose tree that was.
When we have these chats every month here on Key Pacific's Talk About Strata, there are just so many opportunities for human conflict in these close quarter living arrangements that strata represents. So I suppose here we're looking in Sarah's case. All she wanted to do was put a nice spelling Christmas tree in her condo, for crying out loud.
Right.
And somebody decided, no, you can't do that. There's a rule. Well, there's no rule.
Exactly.
So the person who told Sarah, you can't bring a tree into this building, what was that about?
Urban myths happen in buildings. I've been to communities where, people believe something is a condition in the building, and you start looking closer and suddenly realize this never was a condition. Someone just started this. We see this happen even in buildings that have been around maybe only 5 or 10 years that have new buildings. The way that strata fees are calculated is a formula that's filed in the Land Title Registry.
Okay.
It's just a basic way of sharing percentages of formulas. Someone might just decide when you're in the budget that that they want to round everything up, so they adjust that. And so things get off the rails quite easily if you're not vigilant and stick to the legislation, stick to the the clarity of your bylaws. And that's probably the greatest difficulty. All the strata corporations that we work with, the first thing that most people fight about in stratas is the same thing every family fights about, which is money.
Yeah.
There's never enough money to pay the bills.
Of course.
Or, how is it being spent? Who's using it? What's happening with it? But the second thing that they dispute a lot about is vagueness of bylaws.
Right.
Lack of clarity in the bylaws. So if you want a bylaw that prohibits Christmas trees, live Christmas trees, you need a bylaw that clearly prohibits live Christmas trees in the strata lot.
And I would think, rather than leaving it until a few days before Christmas, you might want to get that sort of information if indeed this strata property is covered by this bylaw, which states absolutely under no circumstances is any live Christmas tree permitted on this premise, period.
Right.
Might you not want to put that out in, say, late October or mid-November?
Strata corporations send out reminders frequently. It's your minutes of your council meetings are a great opportunity. Your front page should be kind of like a newsletter, a summary of the bullet items, just a reminder in the upcoming 2 months, these are the issues. There'll be window cleaning on the buildings, a reminder Christmas trees are prohibited.
Yeah.
Our strata insurance renews this month. Make sure that you renew your homeowner insurance. Check your smoke alarms. There's a long list of reminders that strata corporations can use in their bylaws. Even if it's the bullet header, most people will look at the first page of the minutes, and that's a great way to catch their attention on what you're doing.
I guess what sort of irks me is, and I shouldn't be taking sides here, but I'm a little miffed on Sarah's behalf that somebody made up a rule to prohibit her from bringing her tree into her building, and I see a person with a bit of an attitude looking for a scrap in a situation where it's not warranted, Tony.
Well, it's we get some derogatory terms used sometimes for the person in the strata who's kind of the keeper of the rules. But you'll find that every now and then you'll have someone who's been on strata council for a long time. They're the president for a long time. They might be taking things a little too far over the edge.
Okay.
They might be acting outside of their scope of authority. And if in fact there is a scenario where a bylaw is broken, an individual council member doesn't get to enforce the bylaw. The strata council sends out a notice to the person. They get an opportunity to respond to this allegation or claim of a complaint, and they get a right to a hearing before council, before a decision is made. So it's not one of those, today I'm telling you you can't keep the tree because you're in violation of the bylaws.
Right.
Well, if there is a bylaw that prohibits trees, then be a good neighbor, hand that person a copy of the bylaw that just says, just a reminder to you, we don't allow trees.
Right.
Sorry that you got a tree. If could you remedy this before we have to deal with a bylaw enforcement issue?
All right, Sarah, thank you very much for your email. The address, if you'd like to shoot one off to Tony and me here at Key Pacific's Talk About Strata, the address is radio@KeyPacific.com. Lots more ahead on Talk About Strata with Tony Giaventu and Sterling Fox after this.
There's still more ahead with Experts on Call, the show focused on delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.